hope you're doing well amid all of our societal kind of craziness, and you're managing it really well. We certainly are at the Dream Exchange doing a great job of piloting our ship through the murky water. And the title today is Building a Bridge to the American Dream. And so really the overarching today topic that I want everyone to be aware of is that our capital markets are changing. They've been dramatically changing for decades, and we have a very refreshing and new idea and a new outlook on how the capital markets will change in the future, and we're at the forefront of changing it. Today's agenda is going to be addressed to this. The decline of the small initial public offering. That's what IPO means. That means it's the first time that a company sells its shares of stock to the general investing public. So that's the word public, and initial is first. Something that's not always easily recognized or readily recognized by the small business owner is that this is a viable option or a viable way to go about raising money. And there's a reason for that, because the small IPOs are all but gone, are dead. And we're going to show you some research on that and why our research has discovered what a big problem that is. Then we're going to talk about venture exchanges and what a venture exchange is and does, and how the future of a venture exchange, it's a form of stock exchange that is yet to be created, what that does for the future of capital markets. Then we're going to go over how it's born. What is it that is taking to get a venture exchange to exist? And we're going to talk about the Main Street Growth Act, which is a bill that is pending in both the United States House of Representatives and the Senate. And then I'll briefly discuss our purpose. And really, hopefully that will inform you as to how you can then participate. So without further ado, this next slide is a very, very compelling piece of information in this slide. Now, if you're a small business owner or you're an investor, you know that, first of all, if you're a small business owner, my hat's off to you. Entrepreneurs and small business owners are the backbone of our country. It's probably even more, I guess, heroic today if you're being a small business owner in the particular environment we find ourselves in. And one of the greatest challenges to the small business is making sure that you have enough capital not only to survive, but to expand. Because if you're not expanding, you're in trouble. I mean, there is no such thing as flat. When a doctor sees a flat line, that means the patient is dead. So things move up and they move down. And if you're not expanding, it poses risk and trouble for your future. And historically, the way companies expand is they raise money. Now, there are two types of marketplaces, and we're going to talk about that later. But the primary one for decades, and that's what the slide shows you, the white part of the bar graph are initial public offerings of stock under $50 million, or $50 million and under. And we have this data going back decades, and you can see from 2000 and before, the overwhelming majority of publicly available stock and initial offerings of stock were for very small companies. The larger companies did not comprise the overwhelming majority. And then you see in 2001 and going forward, very, very few. And it's almost like a catastrophic event happened. It's like the dinosaurs went extinct. And there's something that apparently is an easy to spot anomaly. There's something changed, right? When you look at the data, it's very compelling that, where did all these small offerings go? Were people just no longer interested, or what happened to the marketplace? So we saw this, actually, I was an observer of this in the 2008-2009 economic crisis, when I began to participate in the small public company and the small company capital raising forum at the Securities Exchange Commission. This data was really compelling to everyone. It's widely known. We've published numerous reports on it. In fact, one of the graphs was in the Wall Street Journal, and the title of the Wall Street Journal was stronger than this slide. It said the death of the small IPO. It's not dead. There are still a few vestiges of life, but it certainly has declined, right? And you can see that it's gone away as an option for you if you're a small business owner. And really the investing portion of it has gone away for the general American investing public. So if you're a small company investor, you like to get in on the front end of a new company where you expect that company to grow and become very large and harvest the gains and the wealth that come from it. That's no longer available to the general investing public. So the first thing we had to do is discover two things. One, was this in fact a problem? And two, if it was a problem, why did it occur? Because that would inform us as to what would be a genuine solution. How could we solve this if it in fact is something that's worthy of being solved? So the first question is this a problem? Is this wrong? Well, as we did a lot of research, and the director of our research at the Dream Exchange is a professor at the University of Wisconsin. His name is Ioannis Floros. He's a brilliant man. And his research with my research, for the better part of 10 years, we were looking at this, trying to decipher, is there more harm than good out of the death of small companies being able to avail themselves of the public markets? And we found many harmful effects. Here are a few. One, raising capital is very difficult because it's become a relationship-driven environment. In other words, if you want to raise money for your small business, you better know somebody, or you better know someone who knows somebody who has a lot of money or can get you into venture capitalists or private equity firms or groups of angel investors so that you can quickly be evaluated. And even the evaluation at that point is relationship driven. Can you be trusted? How do they look at your management team? So raising capital is incredibly more difficult, especially if you're willing to comply with giving all the information to your potential investors. Now, as a side effect of having difficulty raising money, it puts a lot of things in a business on hold. One of the most significant delays or pauses in small business growth that comes from this is the critical employees that you may need to expand are delayed. So you can't always wait for the expanded sales growth or the expanded marketplace to allow you to put the staff or the team or the infrastructure in place. So it delays hiring employees. Well, if you can't have adequate staff and you're running your company and you're a small business person, well, guess what happens? Your time is pulled in many directions. So it's a distraction. Not only that, raising private capital takes an enormous amount of labor from the senior management of a company. You can spend hours and hours dealing with a lot of different professionals while also surveying and trying to find the right investor or a willing investor. So it's a distraction to senior management. Well, if you're spending all of your time trying to raise money, you're not actually working in your business. You're not actually producing more sales or making your products better. You're spending time as the captain or the CEO, which is an appropriate thing for a CEO to do, except in a small business environment, it can really hinder the progress of the company growing. And what does this ultimately do? Well, it threatens the survival of the small company. And being able to survive, and I don't say this lightly in today's environment, just surviving is meritorious today. If you can stay alive, if you can keep going forward in the environment without adequate capital, that's actually a feather in your cap today. Many companies will not survive. The alternative is they borrow money, which, in fact, the government is famous for this. Loan programs. We have the payroll protection program. Well, the question is, how do you pay it back? How, if you can't grow and you're ultimately obligated to keep making new debt payments and increase debt, it really acts as a hindrance. Good, healthy capital is needed in small businesses with good ideas. It's been needed since the beginning of time. It's where all of the gains that we've made in our society with new products and new inventions and the greatest companies that are on the face of our earth today were all born from investments at their earliest stages. And we've made it incredibly difficult. Now, there are also the harmful effects, and I alluded to this earlier, on investors. So if you're an investor today, because the markets have gone into a relationship-driven marketplace where all the transactions are between private individuals, the average investor doesn't have the same, what they call visibility. He no longer gets to see the transaction, because if it's a great one, some of the best venture capitalists and private equity firms scoop it up and they take it all for themselves. Whereas in a small public company environment, many investors can, and I mean investors, I don't mean speculators, I don't mean someone who's just going to take a gamble on a stock, but someone who's willing to invest early and believe in a company's long-term growth. Well, investors don't get to see the best deals. They don't have access. And throughout today, you're going to hear the word access a lot. That is probably, if you're taking something away from this discussion today, the key takeaway is getting access between the company and a larger pool of investors so that they can make wise investment decisions and we can expand companies. And now the number two impact on investors with this shift away from public capital markets is the uncertainty of exits. When I was practicing law, I represented a lot of wealthy people. And ultimately, their question to me was, this is a great company. I want to make this small investment. I really want to understand, how do I get out? How do I recuperate my investment profitably? Well, there are always a number of ways. You can sell it to a big company. You can sell it to the employees. You can be acquired by some strategic partner or some strategic acquisition. Or, in fact, one of the most common ways in the past was you go public. Well, today we don't really have that option. You can see that the small company going public really is no longer a viable solution. So that is a tremendous hindrance to liquidity. Liquidity being getting cash back for your investment. Obviously, you can wait until the profits of the company pay you back, but that's really not why people invest in small businesses. They invest in the small business because they know it's going to appreciate in value over time. And as the company becomes bigger and more valuable, they'll be able to sell their shares for more money than they invested. So waiting for dividends or waiting for profitability isn't necessarily the optimal solution. So how do we get out is that question. It's kind of how it was always framed to me by my investors. So these are very harmful effects that are really solved in many ways by having the availability of a public marketplace to the small company. So as I said earlier, was this a problem that the 50 million and under marketplace all but disappeared? Well, over the research that we did overwhelmingly concluded, yes, this is a problem in the American capital markets. So having said that, it's like, okay, well, what caused it? Well, this was a bit difficult to confront. And the confront of this was raising more. Now, the data is inverted here. So more than 50 million is on top, less than 50 million is down below. But you can see as a percentage, for decades, more than 70%, sometimes as much as 90% of all initial public offerings were 50 million and under. And then you see that meteoric decline, right? From the red line, which is we're kind of burying the lead, but from the birth of Archipelago in 1998, all the way down to 2000 and I want to say 2003, my eyes serve me correctly, you see this dramatic decline. So after 2001, 2002, as I participated in the Securities Exchange Commission think tanks, many regulations and other collateral issues were blamed for this decline. It costs more to go public, there's increased regulation, there's too much reporting requirements, it's too demanding on the team, there isn't enough money to be made by the small company, lacking sophistication. The list goes on and on and on. In fact, some of them have been demonized. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act was blamed for a long time. The national market regulations were blamed. Many what we call the alphabet soup. They all come with 3 letters. All of those blameworthy, and they are things that are deterrents, but they all come after the decline. So in our research, we're very data-driven. So Professor Flores and I were looking at what is the data actually telling us? How can we be informed by the data? And if you have something you're naming is the cause of a problem, but it occurs after the problem has already come into existence, it can't be the cause, right? It's got to be cause then effect. It can't be effect then cause. So looking very carefully at this, we really noted, and I happen to have been at the birthplace of Archipelago, that there was this tremendous shift from private on the trading floor transactions that were then turned into public markets by market specialists and market makers, where, you know, the expression in the 1980s that you no longer hear was, would you like to get in early on this IPO? Would you like to be an early investor in this public offering? That doesn't exist anymore. When a company goes public today, it's usually multi-billions of dollars, and all those early gains have already been harvested. So if you're not one of the select few celebrity unicorns, like who've been harvested by the time they go public. In addition, the entrepreneur is then faced with having to compete to be a multi-billion-dollar public offering, or he's got virtually no hope. Now, why is that? Well, it's a little known fact. How do stock exchanges and investment banks make money? Well, a stock exchange makes money in three different ways. The primary way it makes money, the number one way, is by the volume of trading. How often and how frequently will the shares of the company that's gone public trade in the marketplace? The higher the volume, the more money to the investment bank and the stock exchange itself. So the intermediaries no longer have a financial interest or stake in seeing a small public company go public. All they have to do is $1 billion company, because in a year, a $50 million transaction will not generate enough volume to make up for what a $1 billion offering may do in a day or two. So imagine that if you're in any business, and in 2 days you can make as much money as you would make in another business for an entire year, what would you choose? So this decline is an economic factor. The economic factor is very much that the capital market system is no longer designed to help the small company go public. So this was a glaring problem, and it was also a glaring cause. Now, armed with that, Professor Floros and I, we actually took all of our data and we compiled it into a very, I want to call it a informative white paper. If you're brave, you should check out our white paper. It's called Low Visibility Markets Acting as Stepping Stones to National Stock Exchanges. It's published in Chapter 9 of Oxford University's Handbook on IPOs. It's a very, very accurate and correct analysis of what has transpired in the marketplace, and it actually outlines the causes of the problem and the characteristics of companies that should have the opportunity to be public. So we know exactly what to do. So knowing that it was a problem, knowing what caused the problem, and having outlined what to do, our next step was, let's look at what has been done in the past. What has the government done? What has the Securities Exchange Commission done? What has the market done to try to solve this problem? And there were numerous solutions that have been inadequate. They're not bad. They just didn't solve the problem. Had they solved the problem, we wouldn't be talking today. So some of the inadequacies are they changed Regulation A and Regulation A+. And I'll go over this in a little bit more detail, but there are only two ways to go public, and these are two ways to go private. They're private offerings of stock. And they were inadequate for a number of reasons. Alternative trading systems, where one could go and attempt to raise your money and resell your shares. Regulation A is another place you can raise your money and attempt to resell your shares. Crowdfunding, you can't resell your shares. They've recently changed crowdfunding from a $1 million to a $5 million annual limitation on the amount of money you can raise. But a lot of these companies need $5, $10, $15 million. Certainly 15 would help. Almost all of the companies we're dealing with are in the range between 5 and 20. So there are some over that, between 20 and 50, but they all fall short as solutions because of one primary reason. There's no auction market. There's no resale of the shares of stock. So when trying to raise the money, that question, how do I get out? Well, timely liquidity. How can I resell my shares in an open marketplace? Excuse me. So those past inadequate solutions, they had some good aspects to them, but they were insufficient. So what does work? Well, auction-style stock exchanges work, and they work swimmingly. We've had a stock exchange existing in the United States for over 230 years. From those stock exchanges, the most significant companies in the world have been born. And even the small fledgling companies have participated in stock exchanges and become much, much bigger and much more profitable. That now, not to say that every company has become Apple Computer that went from a garage to one of the largest computer companies in the world. There are thousands of intermediate step companies, probably like the company you may be working for or that you own, or if you're an investor, the companies you're looking at. How can I get some liquidity? How can I get other investors to participate in what it appears to be a very good idea? Well, auction-style stock exchanges work. They're proven for 230 years. They're also very efficient. In other words, there's that word, access. It allows a secure environment where investors can be protected, where rules exist so that the company has to provide adequate information so that the investor can see and have access to the small investment, and so that the company can have access to a large pool of investors, that they both are able to benefit from one another. So what we needed was some combination, some of the best aspects of the solutions that were not adequate, and the greatest feature of a capital market, where capital, large sums of money, flow into the marketplace and is distributed to companies so that those companies can then flourish and prosper. So with these two, finding inadequate solutions and then seeing what a good solution has been for over 230 years, we began to look at what would be the mechanics of this? How could we get really very deliberate and very specific with exactly how to solve the problem? So that is really underlying a single question. How is a company allowed to raise money and sell its stock? Because that's what you do in a private offering. You're actually selling your shares of stock or your membership units if you're a limited liability company. How do you do that today? Well, there's only two ways. The Securities Act of 1933 opens with a paragraph that's seemingly very hopeless. It says that the public or a company may not offer its shares to the general investing public using interstate commerce, period. You can't sell your shares. So it's done every day, right? Every day shares are bought and sold in the stock market, private investments happen. So what has to happen for you to be able to do it? Well, there's only two ways. Number one is you can register your stock with the Securities Exchange Commission. You can file what's called a registration statement. When you file that registration statement with the Securities Exchange Commission and they approve it, you're then eligible to sell your stock to any person anywhere in America. Now, that being said, that doesn't really give you a marketplace. There's another aspect to registration, which is called listing on a stock exchange. A registration statement doesn't automatically allow your company access to the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ Stock Exchange. You must go further and meet certain limitations that are imposed by the stock exchanges. So just registering the company is insufficient. But the first step to complying with the law is registering the stock with the SEC. So the second way you can raise money is you can adhere to an exemption, and there are a myriad of them. At any given count, depending on subparts, there's at least 18 different ways to raise money using an exemption to the securities laws, meaning you are exempt from filing a registration statement. However, there are some setbacks to that. The first one is you may not offer your shares to the general public. You can only offer it to a limited number of people, and there are requirements for those people called accredited investor rules or institutional rules that prohibit companies from being able, or individuals from being able to buy your stock. So that being said, that limitation limits the pool of potential investors, and you can't resell it. Those investors who invest in you, they have what's called an illiquid private investment. If you're a company owner today and you have shares of stock in your private company, you have an illiquid private investment in your own company. You cannot resell your shares unless you comply with an exemption or you register the shares. Now, there are complex rules about that, and it's quite expensive. And as I alluded to in the early slides, there's not a lot of interest. People in the financial services professions, intermediaries, are terribly uninterested in the very small public company environment. Now, you might get a lot of interest from private companies, but those private investors really hold sway. They have all the leverage. They have all the negotiating power, because your alternative is, well, I either deal with this investor in his terms, or I have to search for more private investors and deal with their terms. You don't have the public option. And in fact, it takes a tremendous amount of professional expertise. You need outside help. So the results today are quite difficult. When we say bad, the private markets are doing extremely well. Although within the last 6 months, we've seen a shift. It's a small one, but more companies are attempting to find alternative ways to going public, because some of the private investors have just decided to hold on to their money during this pandemic and the economic and political turmoil that's happening. Private investors are a little more reluctant to invest. So it's actually amplifying our business plan at the Dream Exchange, because the Dream Exchange business plan and the solutions that we're creating are actually a very genuine solution that cuts across all of the economic and political lines of our country as a genuine form to help you if you're a small business owner or a small business investor. I want to make sure that I'm on time. Okay, I'm doing okay on time, because I intend to go through the mechanics of the Dream Exchange in great detail in this particular webinar. So, how will a company be allowed to sell its stock, assuming that we are successful? Now, the Dream Exchange has some bigger plans. In addition to this, we intend to become a national market stock exchange, in addition to becoming something called a venture exchange. So this is only going to discuss the pathway we have toward becoming a venture exchange, because I think this is so novel and so exciting, and it's a genuine paradigm shift. It is an idea whose time has come in our society, because for 87 years, certain securities laws have prohibited this small company marketplace from existing without tremendous interest from the most powerful investment banks and stock exchanges. So what did we do? We formulated a plan to create a brand new type of stock exchange. That new type of stock exchange is called a venture exchange. We've also helped to perpetuate a new type of security, a new type of stock called a venture security. Now, if you want to get the data on this, it's all in the Main Street Growth Act. It's a little complex. But what does the Main Street Growth Act do? What is the policy behind this new law that's pending in Congress? Well, the first policy reason to do it, there's that word again, is accessibility. More companies will have access to an auction-style exchange and more investors, because through a public market, you're no longer negotiating with a single investment bank or a single investor. You can actually prepare all of the information that once was readily available, and you can file a registration. And in that registration, a venture exchange is more able to list it on its type of stock exchange than does the larger exchanges. So it's just kind of a small company exchange, granting access between the investor and the small business. The second policy reason is liquidity. In other words, it's patently unfair, with the tremendous strides we've made in financial technology and communication technology, to limit the access of investors in small companies merely by virtue of some antiquated laws that said you can't be protected because the general public can't trust the investment. And that may have been true at one time. I'm certain that in 1935 or in the 1920s, when they were creating the securities laws, it was certainly easier to forge or formulate false documents and false stock certificates, and there's all kinds of problems that the securities laws were intended to correct. But today it's very difficult to do that. We have a tremendous amount of financial technology to make it secure so that the resale of the stock is in a very safe environment, which also gives you timely access to your liquidity. If you make that small investment when you're an early stage investor, well, you can nearly immediately resell the investment if it's doing well. This is what happens in every public offering, right? People invested in Facebook, and in the first few days, they may have decided that the stock went up sufficiently. They took a small gain and they sold. It certainly is happening with the larger multi-billion-dollar offerings. It still works. It's a workable form of creating timely liquidity for investors. And guess what? For you, if you're the small business owner, and I apologize if I appear to be directing most of this to the small business owner, but investors tend to understand this quite well. And in fact, we have a lot of them who are participating in our introductory products that really do understand, listen, can you just get me a look at this? I can't wait till the Dream Exchange opens. In fact, we have some accolades from investors and small business owners who think this is just, it's absolutely the paradigm shift needed for small business in America today. Timely access to liquidity. And I wish I could begin to give you the litmus of all the different things that have been said to me about investors wanting to resell a private investment. Anywhere from, gee, I invested $100,000 in this small company. They're doing very well, but my son wants to go to college and I'd like to have some of it back. And he can't resell. Anywhere from that to, I want to put a deck on my house, or I'd like to buy a car, or I'd like to put it in my retirement account. The list goes on and on and on. But in a private setting, reselling the investment is a near impossibility. Whereas in a public setting, it's as simple as deciding to sell and offering your shares for sale in a secure public marketplace. So timely access to liquidity as a policy behind creating small business investment is absolutely an idea whose time has come. We have plenty of financial technology and our technology that we're in the process of building what they call the pipes of our exchange is really very secure and very safe, and it's going to be a great marketplace for the small business and small business investor. Now, the next policy reason is transparency. Behind this new law, one of the major considerations was, how will the investor know? How will he know what he's investing in? How will he be secure in understanding the data? Well, in this new marketplace, there are requirements for the small company to inform the investors. Now, most small private investments have virtually no requirement. In other words, if you raise money in a private setting, you can have literally no annual reporting requirements to your investor. But in this environment, you have to be far more transparent. You have to give them regular updates. You have to make progress. You have to meet milestones. And that timely access to liquidity for businesses and investors comes through the transparency, because other people will be able to see the investment and they too will be able to decide to buy or sell. Lastly, it's effective. The swift completion of capital transactions, look, it's undeniable today that financial technology has reached a plateau never before imagined. We transfer our money on our mobile phones through an app securely every day. And it's swift and it's easy, and you make your decision and you push a button on an app and suddenly money has moved from one direction to another. And it's the simplicity of it, is that's how simple this will be, except it will be dedicated and directed at the small business environment. So accessibility, liquidity, transparency, and effectiveness are only 4 of the main policy considerations behind this act. There are numerous others. The Main Street Growth Act, to give you the evidence of how strong the position behind this new law is, we have a little bit of the history behind it. So as I alluded to earlier, in 2009 and 2010, I began to participate in these forums at the Securities Exchange Commission of fellow securities lawyers and brokers and investment bankers to see how we could help the small business environment. And that's going back now 11 years. So there were at least 5 or 6 years where studying the problem and really looking carefully at all the data that you saw at the beginning of the webinar was mulled over by some of the greatest financial minds in our country. Well, by 2015, a new piece of legislation was introduced, and the venture security legislation was introduced. And this was in the 114th Congress. At that time, it was about a 4-page law, and my personal opinion is it was not a very good one. It was workable, but not at the level of necessary change needed to really get through to help the whole country. So that in that Congress, in the 114th Congress, we were able to get the bill out of the House Financial Services Committee. Okay, now that vote was somewhat telling because there were a lot of policy-related objections to the law. So from 2016 to 2018, to the end of 2018, our group, our government relations team, which is a tremendous group of people, the head of the team is a former congressman. He's very wise in the ways of Washington, but he's also astute. His name is Marty Rousseau, Congressman Marty Rousseau. He's retired. What he was really working on was how could we get a consensus? And he really put me to the task of what would be a good law for the American people. So we worked on a redraft, and we weren't the only ones working on this redraft. The NASDAQ Stock Exchange worked on it extensively. At the time, Congressman Henserling was the chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, and the minority leader was Congresswoman Maxine Waters. We worked with their teams, and it took a good 2 years of very detailed redrafting of this law. That law was introduced, and it passed the House Financial Services Committee on a vote of 56-0. Now, all Republicans and all Democrats agreed that this was a good law. Now, I don't know if you realize this, but I've been to Washington in 2018. I was probably in Washington 8 out of the 12 months of that year. There are a lot of political divisions in our country, and perhaps that's the greatest understatement that I could be making today. But we were able to get Republicans and Democrats to unanimously consent out of committee. The changes we made really benefit the American people. And because of this, the House of Representatives voted in favor of this bill 435-0. Once it passed the House, it went over to the U.S. Senate, and once in the Senate, the bill was attached to the year-end appropriations law, and it was voted on and passed through the appropriations law. Now, I don't know if you can recall, but at the end of 2018, Congress went into a completely unrelated battle over whether or not there was going to be funding for a border wall construction on the southern border of the United States, and the government shut down. All the legislation attached to the funding of our government was then stripped away from the bill. So for a completely unrelated matter, this law was not passed at the end of 2018. Now, that being said, we wouldn't be talking today had that not occurred, because this is a very, very important piece of legislation for small business in our country. Well, in 2019, it was almost immediately reintroduced. It was bipartisan, so both a Republican and Democrat introduced the law. And obviously for the last, better part of the last 18 to 20 months, there have been distractions in the United States Congress between impeachments and pandemics and various other things happening. There was only one hearing held on capital markets in the last 20 months in the House of Representatives, one. And out of the thousands of pieces of legislation, only 10 were brought up and kind of hashed over at the hearing. The Main Street Growth Act was one of those bills. So we were able to secure a positive result from yet another hearing. Now that bill still sits in the House Financial Services Committee today, and the first order of business on Friday, November 6th, after this last election, was the senior counsel for the House Financial Services Committee had a meeting with our team to discuss how we can push this law through during the end of the year. Now, it's not a standalone bill. It's only 11 pages long. So therefore, the necessity is that some other larger piece of legislation will be required to add these smaller bills to. So we're hoping that either the appropriations bill this year, or there is still a pending potential stimulus bill. What the feedback from the members of Congress and the Senate is, this represents a tremendous small business stimulus. The potential to help small businesses receive funding through this law without taxpayer dollars is viewed very favorably. And so we're no longer debating the policy. We're no longer debating the politics. Unrelated matters are really what is holding this bill in abeyance right now in November of 2020. On the other hand, if we time out, there's such unanimous agreement that going into next year, it's clear, and this is a lesson in civics, sometimes the journey that a law makes may take this long. It's clear that it's a matter of when this bill will pass rather than whether it will pass at this point. So we're currently working with the United States Congress, and when I say that, I've actually had Zoom meetings for the last eight months with senior members, people you see on TV in both the House and the Senate. Our team has been meeting with them to get this important legislation through the Congress. And why is that? So I want you to really understand that this is a paradigm shift at tremendous levels. Like if you were a small business owner and the key milestone in one part of your business plan was pass a law through Congress, and we were able to accomplish the milestones we've accomplished, we would be a tremendous success. I consider this to be an outstanding indication of the strength of our team and the strength of this new law, as well as what is behind the law. And this is what's most important today. And I hope I'm not going to run out of time. But what's important is the mechanics. What you see on the screen here is exactly how the future of liquidity will work for small businesses. Now, I'm not saying we're going to be the only venture exchange in the country. On the other hand, I do believe that there will be very few. And because we're the pioneers in working out the mechanics behind this law and the 13 years of research we've done, we really do know exactly how it's going to work. We're building it as we speak. And what you see on the screen right now, in that blue box, is exactly what a stock exchange is. A stock exchange is merely a set of rules by which the buying and the selling of stock are conducted. It's the referee, if you will, of the game of buying and selling stock. What you see outside the box, where you see the word company and investor, this is the process by which someone gets invited to play in the game. So on the left side where you see company, it says quantitative, qualitative, and financial. These are evaluations, and we're currently doing this. We're not waiting. We're currently helping companies prepare themselves for the eventuality that this marketplace will exist. So we're getting them ready to join the game. We're doing the same thing with investors, similar analysis, quantitative, qualitative, and financial analysis of an investor so they can join the game. Now, once the game is live, there is something called due diligence, the common phrase that everyone in the financial services profession is familiar with, due diligence. But what does it mean in this environment? Well, remember the policy considerations? Transparency. We have to really help the company bring its standards up to the point where they can be transparent so the investor can be fully informed making an investment decision. Also, governance. Does the company obey the laws? Are they obeying their own laws, their own corporate governance? Are they in compliance with everything they're saying they're going to do? And is the investor in compliance? Or does the investor have bad intentions? We're looking at all of that before they get to pass through that little keyhole. And what's important is there may be many applicants to be investors and to be small companies that trade on the exchange, but only when fully prepared will they make it through the keyhole. And the earlier that one begins preparation, the better. Because as companies and investors make it through the keyhole into the auction market, a bona fide stock exchange designed specifically with rules that help the small business investor and small company to trade in an initial offering. It'll probably be called an initial venture offering of its shares. And when those shares are traded, the early stage investor and entrepreneur or small company owner, they'll be able to harvest those gains, those initial gains that they initially have to give away to probably the private investors who hold sway, or because they're waiting such a long time, those appreciated rights tend to go to other people. Well, we're opening it up to the American public in the initial offering phase. And we're calling it a venue. Think of a theater. Think of the environment where we're going to use state-of-the-art audio and visual communication. And if the pandemic has given us any blessing, it is proof that audio-visual communications and the use of this from anywhere without having to fly in private jets to conduct your initial interviews with investors and company executives. This can all be done in an audio-visual environment, and we're designing it to do that very thing. More theater-like than merely, I see the numbers on the screen because the multi-billion-dollar offering just happened. This is your opportunity as a small company and as a small investor to actually participate in seeing for yourself the access to each other. Now, the last feature in the mechanics here, and this is perhaps the thing I'm most proud of, is that secondary trading can happen. The right to resell the shares. This is something that does not currently exist. So that right to resell, the right to, at any given moment, offer more shares or raise more money and have an environment where it's trading according to specialized rules. Now, if you read the bill, there are many, many technical terms that have been included. Protections for the small company as well as the small company investor that we've specifically designed in our rules to make sure that this marketplace works and there is secondary trading without any of the ordinary abuses that have happened in smaller markets in the past. So it's a customized rule book that we've designed. And I'm very proud of our team. We're actually in the process of beginning to code what will become this exchange using our customized rules. This is exactly how it will work, and it will become a part of the daily fabric. I'm hoping that there's a ticker tape along the bottom of all the news shows that you see that says NYSE, it says NASDAQ, and then it says DREX, the Dream Exchange. So your company will be able to be listed and have its secondary trading liquidity advertised to the world. And as those shares move up and down, people will be able to take their hard-earned money and invest in really good companies and expand their wealth, because that's how our country has made itself great. We've made great wealthy people, we've great wealthy companies, and we've really supported the fabric of our country using auction-style stock exchanges. And without this customized design, those small companies are really not available to the public. So we're at the forefront of that. I think we are the pioneers. We're probably the opinion leaders, at least if you believe Oxford University. We're definitely at the forefront of designing exactly how this liquidity will work. We're calling it the underserved marketplaces. And what's important to us about these underserved marketplaces is this. It's people from all walks of life, and we are actually targeting, we call them the underserved communities, but really it is a minority community. It's the Black, Asian, Hispanic companies who have not really participated in the capital markets for all these years. There's been only one Black-owned company in the 230-year history of the New York Stock Exchange to make it to the New York Stock Exchange. So our intention is to see thousands of companies participate in this marketplace under these customized rules in the decades to come. So these are the mechanics. Now, I know I may have raised more questions, in fact, than I have answers for, and I'm running out of time. But I wanted to give you a little bit of the ways you can get started to participate and to connect with us. So one of the things we've done is we've created a software for small companies and small company investors. It's called DreamXConnect. So the first thing you can do is go to our website, go to DreamXConnect, and create a profile. In that profile, you'll have numerous ways to describe your company, and then you can network with other businesses or investors on that platform. An investor is able to do the same thing. He can put his individual profile or his company's profile. I think we're approaching about 500 people in each side. So we have 500 companies, about 500 investors. We've only been doing it, it's less than 90 days. And we're primarily just marketing it, doing webinars like this to train you in doing it. But we will customize train you if you go to our website, and you will then get access to one another. You can get these strategic relationships. It can help you raise capital. It can help you find vendors. It can help you find business professionals. It can help you forge all the strategic relationships that you'll need to eventually participate in the venture exchange marketplace. We already have some successes. Some of the small companies have found strategic partners and investors, and we're beginning to see this success. You can't trade or buy stock or offer stock through this social media platform, but it gives you access to one another. The key, access to one another in an open and free marketplace where your ideas can be on display for other companies and investors. Now, the other way, there are a number of other ways, and I'll outline those too. And you can ask questions. I'm going to go to the chat because I don't want to go over an hour. But I really want you to understand the purpose behind this access to small businesses that we're trying to create. The purpose of our company is to get the flow of capital in our world into products and services that enhance the survival of mankind. I don't say that lightly. You see, 120 years ago, if you wanted to go to the grocery store, you had to get in a carriage with a horse pulling it. And today you get in a climate-controlled vehicle, and you live in a climate-controlled home. And we have inventions that have forever transformed how man survives on this planet. And we're in a paradigm shift of that as well. What will be the best products? What will be the best way for us to live and survive? We now have communication devices that are unheard of. When I was a child, I had to be tethered to the wall if I wanted to talk on the phone with my friends. And my children walk the neighborhood with their iPhones today. All of those inventions were created and then paid for in the capital markets of the United States. The difference between the last 120 years of our existence and literally the thousands of years before that is that we've created a marketplace for ideas, and we've funded those ideas and their expansion to the point where it's entirely possible that someday we will have human beings traveling to Mars. That's unheard of. And the technology and the innovation and the greatest ideas that are known to mankind have all come through auction-style stock exchanges over the last 120 years. And our purpose is designed to target those early ideas. So if you're an innovator and you have an imagination and you have a product that you think can expand how people live a better life, and I'm not saying you have to invent the next capacitors for the space shuttle. Simple ideas that blossom into bigger ideas is exactly what we're looking for. You have to have a purpose that has imagination. If you're a dry cleaner and you have a way to make dry cleaning a more survival-oriented, less pollutive, less destructive way, we're interested. We are not the Shark Tank telling you how you aren't going to make it. We're here to tell you how you can. And that's the difference. We want to survive better, and we want to create prosperity across the landscape of the small companies because of the backbone of our country. That's our purpose. And I believe, we're now up to close to 100 investors in the Dream Exchange. We have room for a few more. Also have at least close to 1,000 people in DreamXConnect. In the past few months, we've had over 1 million people through our website. So this is clearly something that our society has seized upon, is very much in favor of, and we want to help you. So we want you to communicate with us, and I hope you find a way to join our team and prosper right alongside us. So thanks for your Thursday, everyone, and I look forward to seeing you all down the road. Have a great weekend.